I was in prison for about 7 years, accused of terrorism.
I was tortured. The pain and the suffering was too much.
In the vibrant neighborhood of Arakilo in Addis Ababa, market stands are now filled with dozens of magazines and newspapers. Today, Ethiopians are free to buy and read what they like. A year and a half ago, this wouldn't have been possible. Students and young people come to Arakilo to read the news, but they often can't afford the paper, so they rent them and give it back once finished. Ethiopia was one of the biggest jailers of journalists before Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took office in April 2018. Last May, UNESCO held World Press Freedom Day in Addis Ababa to champion this new era. It was the first time since 2004 no journalists were incarcerated. 5 months later, this progress remains questionable. In the first year, the new government enacted democratic reforms, freed imprisoned journalists and opponents, unblocked 264 websites previously banned, and restricted TV stations were given freedom to operate across the country. Dr. Ahmed has also signed a peace agreement with its historical enemy, Eritrea. But recently, a failed coup attempt to internet blackouts and a new wave of journalist arrests has returned the country to a state of instability. The road to full press freedom seems a long one. Back in May, before this instability, IOHR traveled to Ethiopia to discover whether this progress was real.
This transition was not expected, like a person who is sleeping and wake up. Previously, we were fighting for the freedom. Nowadays, we have attained this freedom. But freedom to what extent? For what purpose? To whom? I think those questions need to be answered. And it has to be formulated as a policy. What is required from the government? What is required from the public? What is required from the journalists? What is required from the professional associations that we have? Because they are responsible for guaranteeing the freedom of expression and press freedom.
But much has changed for someone who has lived under 6 rulers. We retrace the journey of press freedom in Ethiopia from the perspective of one of the main voices of journalism in the country, 90-year-old
Jacob Waldemariam Shuba Leka.
Journalism and writing has been Jacob's life's work. Despite recently turning blind, Jacob still engages in journalism. He moved to London in 1950 for 4 years to work as a reporter. He then returned to Ethiopia and became editor-in-chief of the first English-language newspaper in the country, the Ethiopian Herald, once run by Englishman David Talbot. For him, this progress is real.
I was in journalism for something like 50 years, and I've never experienced such freedom of expression in Ethiopia. Whenever you read newspapers, when you listen to the radio, even government media, they're talking freely.
When he joined the Ethiopian Herald in 1959, Emperor Haile Selassie was in power.
At that time, journalism was really not journalism as it is known in the West. All you have to do is you report news, you write editorials. But all these, the editorials and the news are only concerned with the activities of the government. You report only what the government is doing in the field of development. You also write editorials praising the emperor for what he is doing.
After the overthrow of the emperor by the Derg junta, Jacob also worked under Marxist dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam, who was finally found guilty of Ethiopian genocide in 2006.
At that time, the Derg people, they didn't want us at all. I was working in the English newspapers, not because I was an ideologist, because they couldn't find somebody else who could write in English. But they replaced all the journalists and they brought in their own people to preach ideology, the ideology of communism. I was an editor of some newspaper, but I was not preaching ideology at all. I was just editing what reporters were writing about development. Ethiopia is really having a free press for the first time in its history.
At the end of 2015, there was a turning point shaping the Ethiopia of today. Protests erupted in the Oromia region over an expansion project of Addis Ababa. This was seen as yet another attempt to discriminate against the Oromo people, the biggest national ethnic group. But the protest then spread to other areas against bad governance. Hundreds of people lost their lives due to a brutal army crackdown. Ethnic tension was also at the heart of the rallies. The Oromo and the Amhara felt excluded from the political process, dominated by the then ruling coalition, the Tigray's People Liberation Front. Following a continuous flow of bloody demonstrations, Prime Minister Desalegn unexpectedly resigned in February 2018. He was replaced as Prime Minister in April by Dr. Abiy Ahmed, himself Oromo, to lead the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia out of the years of repression to a new democratic country.
ስልጣን ከያዙ ጀምሮ ያለው የሀገር ላይ ያለው እየመጣ ያለው ለውጥ እጅግ በጣም ደስ የሚያሰኝ ይቀጥል።
He's a very charismatic.
Sometimes associating the future of Ethiopia only with him can be counterproductive.
He believes that we are all one, all Ethiopians are one.
This newly found freedom raised Ethiopia over 40 places up the World Press Freedom Index after languishing near the bottom for years. But Ethiopia is living in a transition period and faces many challenges. Politics is strongly ethnicized and the country is fractured. There are still huge hurdles for those journalists whose job it is to report the truth. The anti-terror legislation law, long used to silence journalists, is still active under the long judicial process of being reformed. Recently, 5 journalists were detained with apparently no evidence. It seems as if Ethiopia is going backwards. Back in May, we met with journalist Wub Shatai, who was unjustly imprisoned for 7 years under the same terrorism law.
Prime Minister Mallas locked down me and other journalists to prison, accused as terrorists. They tried to intimidate us repeatedly. We denied. We say we never give up because we have a mission to the public, journalistic mission.
After serving a 7-year sentence in the most inhumane jails of Ethiopia, Vubshet has returned back to work, back to the world of journalism.
Please come. Nistilin, Jetnachu, come jirtu, jirtu, Adoma. So this is our main studios. They are all the technicians. And before we are starting our recording, we are talking about how much time it takes and something like that. This is our program.
Vubshet is the editor of Gulele Post magazine. He runs this weekly news review program with Oromia TV channel. Before the program went on air, we caught him backstage. We wanted to know the Vubshet eye of today after all the horrific experiences he went through.
Vubshet Taye is nobody but trying to exercise his profession professionally, keeping journalism ethics. Ethiopia is at the transition time, so Vubshet is trying to share his profession to newly coming journalists and to the public. የድረጉለሌ ተመልካቾቻችን ይህ በየሳምንቱ አንድ ጊዜ የምናቀርብላችሁ የሚዲያዎች ዳሰሳ መድረክ ነው። በዛሬው ዕለት አብሮኝ የሚገኘው የኦሮሚያ ሚዲያ ኔትወርክ ባልደረባ የሆነው ቶሌራ ፍቅሩ ነው።
Until last June, OMN was forced to operate outside the country. TV channels such as OMN and ISAT were labeled as terrorist organizations, and the public was banned from viewing them. Now, these satellite TVs are finally allowed to operate in the country.
OMN was operating as a resistance media. OMN has been established in the year 2014 and abroad in Minnesota. Here in Ethiopia, OMN was established in last June as a part of the ongoing transformation and democratization in Ethiopia. It has been really an encouraging event and encouraging phenomena, not only for OMN but for other media houses. We were focusing on the stories actually were the stories of movement, particularly movement of protest. OMN was one of the major media that has really realized the democratization reform in Ethiopia.
Behind bars, Ethiopian journalists suffer torture and abuse. Vubshet was held in the infamous Kaliti prison and in Zewai, in a section reserved for political prisoners known as Kelema Bete, which translates from the Amharic language to dark and closed. While he was detained in 2013, he was honored with the CNN Free Press Africa Award. His wife and son accepted it on his behalf. We asked him how he feels to be back to the world of journalism and what he feels about Dr. Abiy Ahmed.
Wow, it's so, it's so a good experience because, I was in prison for about 7 years, accused of terrorism. That was a bad experience. My son was about 3 years old. The regime tried many methods to intimidate journalists, to abandon many media organizations because we were trying to stand with the public because we are on behalf of the public. So they tried to lobby us to work with them, but journalism is different. We must be objective. They were coming in our office twice, three times, 4 times a week, and they are trying to intimidate us, but we denied. So they finally accused us in terrorism, and I was sentenced 14 years of imprisonment. And finally, in early 2018, we all are released, thanks to God and to our people and to international communities. Yeah. Things are changed, time are changed. I talked with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and asked 2 things. How do you evaluate the change? And he said, we are in the transition period. He said, I don't believe this is our end. And my second question was, this transition period has his own difficulties. So he also said it will be improved very soon.
There's a wave of euphoria among Ethiopians about this new era, but there are still many challenges for media and journalists.
When we work on stories, still there is very limited access to information, particularly from the perspective of government. The officials really respond with very minimal frequencies. The other thing is really very challenging is the media financing in Ethiopia, as it has been discussed during the World Press Day. The media culture and the media marketing, media literacy is very low in Ethiopia. So this poses very critical challenge to us.
When the media could not play the role of the watchdog, Ethiopians used online platforms to tell what was happening in their country. Until authorities blocked their websites and blogs, and in the worst cases, arrested the authors.
I have always lived through fear, and I am always scared of looking at policemen in the streets. It feels like they are coming at me. Coincidentally, Zone 9 blogging collective has 9 members. Some political prisoner called us Zone 9ers, and we were surprised because we never heard that term before. Ality, the famous prison in Ethiopia, has 8 zones, and the political prisoners inside those zones used to call the outside region metaphorically as Zone 9 to say that Ethiopia is a big prison where political freedoms are restricted. So we thought we are going to be writing about political freedoms. After 2 years of functioning as Zone 9 members, we were jailed in April 2014, and we were told that we were suspected of working with foreign elements to instigate color revolution in the country, to oust the government, and also said that we have been doing terrorist activities.
Makalawi prison was closed by Dr. Abiy Ahmed to end a long chapter of human rights abuses. Befekadu and other inmates went back to visit it after it was opened to the public.
This is Siberia, as it is called by the prisoners. It used to be very dark because these openings that allow light to enter now, they were not there. It was blocked, and there was only a small bulb right there from outside. So the only source of light in the rooms was those bulbs, and it is usually cold and dark. I always remember when the policemen came in to take me, I hear the voice of the handcuffs. So when they come in, you know they are going to take you. So your heart starts to pump. You get scared, and then you just give your hands to be handcuffed and be taken to the torture rooms. I don't call them interrogation rooms because all they do was torture. Back in 2014 in Makalawi, I was tortured. I suffered a lot, and the interrogator wanted to force me self-incriminate myself. So the pain and the suffering was too much to bear. So I finally decided to sign on a paper on which they have written that I was actually blogging to, instigate color revolution sponsored by neoliberal countries. So it was total lie. Suddenly, this political change happened. The Prime Minister came and his team announced the reforms, and I started to feel safe around police people.
The question is now whether Ethiopians are ready for this change. Fake news is certainly an issue that needs to be faced, with journalists and social media users spreading it to trigger ethnic division.
We have engaged into different conflicts. I think the cause of these conflicts, to me, is the mismanagement of social media. The journalists are highly responsible for this. We have no strong association, especially. We have no any press council who is responsible especially to formulate code of conduct in this area and control the activities of the journalists. So we need that. Professionalism should take place.
There are unethical activities of activists, media practitioners. The government is proposing for anti-hate speech law that may sound like a solution for the current unethical and unprofessional reporting, but no, it's not, because it is rather media literacy that works better, because we don't have the institutions to even prosecute those violators. One of the biggest challenges for Ethiopia is that next year an election is coming and the oppositions are barely organized, and there are no still strong media organizations that can impartially report the details of the competitors to make the participants informed. There are no civil societies. Would election time bring some more chaos in the country?
Journalists who have been jailed now hope for a better future for the next generation of reporters. Only time will tell if Ethiopia will live up to that dream of being a free, democratic country that respects journalism. But one thing is for sure, Ethiopia's younger journalists are eager to continue driving this change.
Now, as I can see, the media freedom is on the way to come.
ጋዜጠኛ እንደመሆኔ መጠን ለወደፊት ያሰብኩት ነገር ሐሳቤን በነጻነት የመግለጽና እንዲሁም በነጻነት ጽሁፎችን ለመጻፍ።
ስለዚህ አሁን ያለነው ትውልዶች ማለትም ሞር መስራት አለብን።
ነገር ፍሪደም በራሱ ብቻ ነቲንግ ነው። ያንን ፍሪደም ሃንድል የሚያደርገው ሲስተም እስከሌለ ድረስ ሀገራችን ውስጥ እንደውም አሁን ከመጡት ካሁን ለውጥ ተብሎ ጋዜጠኞች ነጻነት ከመጣ በኋላ ነው በጣም በልክ የሆኑ ቻሌንጆች እየገጠሙን ያሉት። መታየት ያለበት ችግሮች ስቲል አሉ እና ደግሞ ጋዜጠኞችና ፖለቲካን መካከል ያለው ክሊር የሆነ ባውንደሪ ሀገራችን ላይ ብሬክ አድርጓል የለም ማለት ይቻላል። ጋዜጠኛው እንደ ፖለቲካን አክት ያደርጋል፣ ፖለቲካኑ ደግሞ ሰማው እንደ ጋዜጠኛ አክት ያደርጋል።
ምናልባት ከአሁን ካለው መንግስት ጋራ አላስፈላጊ ነገር ገብቶ ይህ የተጀመረው ጅምር እንዳይታጠፍና ተቀልብሶ ከዚህ በፊት እንደነበረው እንዳለፉት መንግስታቶች ጋዜጠኞችን እንዳያስራቸውና እንዲሁም እንዳይሰደዱ እፈራለሁ።